We have started. Do 18A. We're going to finish that up. That's 11. I do not want 11. I want 18. It's the Betsy. That's correct. I want 18A. Where did I put it? 18A. There we are. Sorry. Remember, we were going through these guys here. So you may recall, again, I just to read, because I think it's important, the consistent feature of all of this, which is that in all, whether it's an artery of any type, elastic or conductive, or the arterials, we always see the most abundant material is muscular. Elastic arteries, as their name would make you obviously be aware of, have a more abundant amount of elastic tissue. The lining is always the same. Okay. And I mean, other than that, it's just a relationship between them. And there's always some elastic tissue, even if you get to the arterial. The big difference is the arterial, and we will go on to see that, is that it has the capacity to squeeze very, very tightly and really redirect blood flow. That's why blood pressure is all about the arterioles. I mean, people erroneously think it's pretty hard to squeeze a major blood vessel, like I was saying before. I mean, you have to really put a lot of pressure on a tourniquet to try to maintain that. Capillaries have none of the above. No elastic, no smooth muscle, no fibrous. Effectively, they're just lining cells that are wrapped. When you get to veins, it's a little bit of the opposite. The fibrous connective tissue predominates, whether they're tiny veins, venules, or larger veins. The only real difference that we begin to see, maybe a subtle, proportionately, it's about the same between fibrous to muscle. We get a little bit of elastic tissue, again, because veins, particularly as they get larger, and then we call them capacitance vessels because they fill up so nicely. It's a good thing. I mean, look what happens anytime if you have to draw blood or you've had your blood drawn. What do? They put a relatively mild tourniquet and just hold that, clench a fist, pump it a few times. They fill up pretty easily, and you can palpably or visibly see, oh, that's a good one, and do the venipuncture. It's easier than it looks. So here we begin to see their function a little bit differently. Elastic or conductive arteries, muscular or distributing arteries, and arterioles. These first two have names. Okay, thick-walled, large, low-resist blood flows easy is what that means. So aorta and its big branches, you can define that pretty much, and we're going to be looking at name that blood vessel today. We're going to be looking at carotid arteries and subclavian arteries. And again, we've already looked at the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. That's what they're talking about, these elastic arteries. They conduct blood from the heart to the next level of vessels. Elasticity, or elastin rather, is found in all three tunics, mostly the media. Substantial smooth muscle. But when it comes to, and again, blood flow is controlled by a process called vasoconstriction. When we get to the nervous system and physiology, basically, you have two systems that control your insides. You have sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is the active division, and parasympathetic is the rest kind of division, if you want to paint it with a very broad brush. What happens is blood flow is all about sympathetics. It's very, very interesting. It's one of the unique features of it. That's why when I talk about the kidney, it's all about sympathetic. There's a lot of different things that impact. Kidneys very, I think, for those who are going to be in physiology, it's not necessarily everybody, next term, the hardest two systems to understand, I think, are immune and kidney. And maybe female repro has some challenges, but other than that, I think digestive is a little more straightforward. So they act as pressure reservoirs that expand and recoil. That's the whole idea of the elasticity. They're the ones that maintain our blood pressure in such a fashion that blood flows surprisingly relatively smoothly. We can feel the pulse. That interval between pulses, let's say for most of us arbitrarily around, you know, 60 beats, you know, on average of maybe 1 beat a second, maybe a little bit faster. I mean, that's enough time really for relaxation to occur. Even though you feel a pulse, our blood flow is not pulsatile. If it's too pulsatile, it becomes, again, it's the raging rapids. There's too much going on, and when blood slams against each other, it clots. It's more of continuous flow. That rebounding effect that occurs and impacts the pulmonary and the pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves is a big player in that. We really go over that when we do blood vessel physiology. Enormously important. The elastic arteries lead to muscular arteries, typically other than the ones I named, whether it's axillary, whether it's brachial, whether it is radial or ulnar, whether it is femoral or obturator. Doesn't matter. Renal, suprarenal, gonadal. All of these arteries who we will be identifying a bit today, those are effectively distributing arteries because they deliver blood to organs in diameter. I mean, your aorta, to give you some idea, is probably about index finger, not nearly as much diameter as your thumb, which surprises people. Maybe the vena cava, the inferior vena cava, is closer to thumb size, if you want to think of it. So by the time we work our way down, pinky size would be a very large vessel like a femoral artery, maybe even a little bit smaller than a typical pinky. And down to pencil it, and again, there are muscular arteries. Typically, they're in that category if we can still see them with the naked eye. Named arteries have a thick tunica media, okay, but less elastic tissue. They have a certain amount of elasticity as they're sandwiched. They are very active. We can control blood flow, not necessarily close them off, but control flow. And then we get to the arterioles. The very presence of that suffix implies you can't see it with the naked eye. The same with venules. So, and there's varying degrees. They can go from 3 tunics, and the smaller ones, typically just a single layer of smooth muscle. And those are the ones where really this sort of muscle encircles it, easy for me to say, and can constrict these things dramatically. That's where the blood pressure element, when we get to physiology, comes in. So it controls blood flow into the capillary beds. And we do this intentionally. So I've been talking in my other class today about fight or flight. And in fight or flight, you redirect your blood flow to your heart and your skeletal muscles dramatically. You take the blood flow away from your digestive and your genitourinary system, dramatically changing it. It's very short term. Fight or flight, you're taking seconds to minutes to do something very drastic in a life-saving sense, move away from danger. Your kid running into the street and you start chasing the dog, gets away, possibly into traffic, you're going nuts, that type of thing. That's fight or flight. Okay. And so what happens is this is one of the areas where we can control and redirect blood flow. So it's very neatly arranged. You don't have to worry about it. It does it by itself. So these are things that we really can't control. We call them resistance arteries because it can change diameters. And then that resistance to the blood flow is really what our blood pressure is all about. So you'll see they're the big players in blood pressure. And unfortunately, because they're also the big players where damage occurs. When you see damage in a named vessel, muscular or an elastic artery, those small ones are pretty far gone. Arterioles are what you remember. I told you that about the eye grounds, about looking at the arterioles in the eye, because an arteriole is an arteriole is an arteriole. Remember we did that in lab. So in the eye, if you're seeing damage there, there's damage everywhere, and that's really, really, very, very significant. Like I said, someone like me would have been. Everybody. My dad died of heart disease at age 74. At a younger age than I am now. and much healthier physically appearing. 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, 32-inch waist. You would not want to get into a fight with that man at 74 years old. Trust me, scary. It's like, you've heard the expression, bark, no bite. Big Sid yelled a lot. Not a whole lot of bite. So understand, I mean, that's, yeah, and it's one of the good things, because my guess, if I hadn't stopped smoking almost 20 years ago, you'd have someone else giving you this talk, and you'd miss out on all the good jokes. Will any of you possibly show a response other than 2 people? Jenna, are you with it this morning?
So with you all the time.
She sounds like my wife. I said, did you hear what I said? She goes, I ignored it. It's okay. I get this at home.
At least you're used to it.
Pardon?
At least you're used to it.
I'm very used to it. I keep telling you, I wouldn't have married me. Says the only mistake I made, I followed my dad's advice, except one time, for my first wife. This is a couple of months before the wedding. He goes, Lou, I want to tell you something. It's up to you, but I wouldn't marry her. Honest to God, truth. It's your call. I'm paying for the wedding, a lot of it. You want to marry her, fine, but take it from me, I wouldn't. But it's up to you. I should have held out for a bribe. Maybe you could have. Cross my palm with silver, we'll talk. Moving on. Capillaries. Extraordinarily, what's a red blood cell? 6, 7 angstroms. Really small. Okay? So at this point, they are microscopic. The walls are just the intima, the lining, the endothelial lining that are there. So they're nothing more than epithelial cells. Even one cell wrapped around would be its circumference. Okay? Around it, there are some stabilizing things. They're called parasites. They control permeability. They're not always there. Almost every cell, and again, go back and look what we talked about originally. What does not have a blood supply? The cartilage, we know, doesn't have blood supply. Blood damages it. Epithelia get it indirectly from the underlying loose areolar connective tissue. The cornea and lens do not. What happens to them is indirect. You should know those 4 tissues that do not get blood supply. I think that's important. Exchange of gases, nutrients, waste, hormones, etc., between the blood and the fluid around the cells, and from there it will get into the cells. It's there. And so it's all about how they're joined together. I do this all the time. I'm sure I did it to you before. Okay. They're joined. It's tight junctions. Tight means watertight. So, I mean, if you just cup your hands, effectively, it doesn't look like there's gaps, but there really is. If you think of something that's molecularly small, little bits of things can get through here. Typical continuous capillaries have gaps that things. I mean, if I put water in this, it's going to eventually leak through. It just is. Because it's not completely watertight. Pretty watertight. That's a continuous capillary. That's the major kind of capillary you have, because that's where the vast majority of the exchange takes place. Skin, muscles, lungs, central nervous system, all of those areas. Central nervous system is a little caveat that's coming. The brain is unique because there's an abundance of tight junctions that create something called the blood-brain barrier. In men, there's one that's called the blood-testicular barrier. In the male reproductive, in the testicular area. Okay? Because sperm cells are produced at puberty, your body views them as foreign, and so if they would get into the bloodstream or into tissues, your white blood cells would attack them. So when there's a tumor or trauma in that area, some kind of damage for whatever reason, that's another thing that's very, very worrisome vis-a-vis recovery and healing that's there. So that blood-brain barrier is unique, and you'll see in next term, we get into the anatomy of these unique kind of connective tissue cells. It's surrounded by what's called a glial cell. Okay, that's really, it's called an astrocyte, means a star-shaped cell. That really creates that blood-brain barrier. But the basic part that makes the water and the water-soluble materials not be able to get into the brain per se has to do with all those tight junctions. So it's like this: little gaps, not very large, all over the place. You can read through that as well as I can. We'll get into the structural basis a little bit more in future chapters. Fenestrated means a window, a little hole or an opening. The glands have these, but the kidney is number one for fenestrated capillaries because they filter. It's like having filter paper. It's like I in here to work every morning. I'm here. I make coffee first thing when I walk in the door. I've got to supplement the 2 to 3 cups I had to get out of my own door in the house. I know I'm a coffee addict. The grounds don't get through. Okay, that's what filtering is. So they give it Swiss cheese like pores. Okay, I personally prefer a little Gruyere, but we digress. See, foodies would have appreciated that. No Gruyere fans? Do you ever have onion soup au gratin with the cheese melted in the crouton? French onion soup? Oh, barbaric. Oh, what a pain in the ass. Oh, just hold on. Off the record. Mike Jordan was an asshole. Okay. So fenestrations increased. Yes, there's usually something. It's not like a filter paper or a scissors or a colander you would have at home, but the idea is the same. Here are the fenestrations. In the kidney, there's a little more extensive anatomy where they can make them more open or more closed depending on the area that are there, and that's what they look like. And so why is that significant? Because red blood cells and proteins can't pass through there. When you're in the kidney and we begin to talk about the uniqueness of it, as it passes through there, it creates something we call filtrate. That's effectively water or plasma with everything in it but proteins and what we call basically organized or formed elements of the bloodstream: white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. Very interesting. And then lastly, you see these mostly in the liver, sometimes in bone marrow, in areas where there is a lot of activity and things moving in and moving out. These are very few tight junctions. They're inherently large, sluggish flow, big molecules. Why the liver? Because all the blood from your stomach, small and large intestine, which is filled with nutrients, filled with partially digested materials, filled with all sorts of stuff that has to be processed by the liver, moves to the liver by this mechanism and is processed there. And there's a lot of white blood cells that are in there. You'll see it's so you should know the difference: sinusoidal, fenestrated, continuous, and then again the unique one that's continuous in the brain. Particularly, we'll talk about in repro. We'll look more at that blood testicular barrier. So the capillary bed itself, network of capillaries between arterioles and venules. So as the vessels get smaller and smaller from the inflowing side, the arterial side, and again, they go through a capillary bed, then they begin to get progressively larger. Once the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients, and waste products, we go from arterial blood to venous blood. Fully oxygenated blood with somewhat or lessened deoxygenated blood. Again, we'll get to that in physiology. When we talk about venous blood, it's got about 25% less oxygen. It's not like magically there's no oxygen. You did that in cell and molecular or in physiology, the whole hemoglobin saturation curve, right? You know, What? It's biochem. Did you get that? And so, yeah. I saw that stuff in genetics this morning. Boy, that was. Why do we need to know that stuff? It's okay. I was talking with a fellow I hadn't talked to in almost 40 years, who I not only went to high school, but I went to podiatry medical school. Very successful. And I said, you cannot believe the stuff that these guys have to learn to get, as bio majors. I said, were you a bio major? He goes, no, he was a psych major. No, I was a chem major. We didn't have to learn that stuff. Capillary beds, microcirculation, another name to it. Most of them have what's called a terminal arteriole. Okay. And then that leads into a variety of capillaries where the exchange, all that good stuff, in and out, and then they're collected. Better to see the illustration. This is controlled by the terminal arteriole, and a lot of things control it. Okay. Dilated when blood is needed, constricted when it's not needed. So there's a lot of things. Basically, we are able to redirect blood flow to areas that require it more and away from areas that don't require it as much. And sometimes it has to do with usage. Sometimes it has to do with damage. There's a really neat way that this is done without getting over it. This is a good illustration. So we can bypass it. Here's the terminal arteriole. If we constrict that, it bypasses it. If it's open, so here's the constriction, it's bypassing it. Here you can see the exchange taking place gradually from that reddish to the bluish color in the capillary bed if that terminal arteriole is not constricted. That's one way of constriction. The other ones are called meta-arterioles or thoroughfare channels. So in certain areas, and it's not important to know where they are, it's a kind of a unique arrangement. So it connects an arteriole and a venial and bypasses the capillary bed. Meta, again, means beyond, and it creates a channel, this bypass channel, between artery and vein. This is more of a label to diagram thing. And it has a little circular cuff of smooth muscle. Again, we don't have any conscious control over it, that surrounds the capillary and acts as a valve. I mean, it's like, I don't know if we do it in our house, you probably did it in your house. When it starts to get all those freeze warnings, you empty the hoses on the outside and get the water out of the system and close the valve because they don't want the line to freeze. Okay. We here live in cold. Okay. So local chemical conditions control this, and this is what it looks like. So these are called precapillary sphincters. When they are closed, it just goes through the thoroughfare channel. Okay, it bypasses the bed. And they used to have an illustration that showed when they were open, how it would basically perfuse. That's a really important word, and I'm glad I remembered saying it. Okay, perfusion indicates good blood flow. So it's really important. When we say something is well perfused, it means it's getting the right, proper amount of blood flow. Okay. When we see the word ischemic, ISCHEMIC, it's not getting enough blood flow. So perfused is good. When we do an organ transplant or they replant a limb and you do everything and you finally take the tourniquet off and let blood flow, you want to see everything pink up. Even when you're doing a routine surgery, like that, you want to see, because that pale structure is going to have to pink up appropriately. If it doesn't do that, it's not good. The same thing with an organ when they transplant a kidney. You see the color change once it gets reconnected and you're able to unclamp and allow the appropriate blood flow. Just for example. Veins on the other side, different. They're carrying blood back toward the heart. They start at the capillary beds. They unite to form postcapillary venules. And again, there's not a lot to it. Basically lining cells and the venules with some surrounding cells. They're very porous. Lots of stuff gets into them, and the larger they are, they start to get smooth muscle. So there's not a lot to a venule, okay? And what happens is there's multiple ones. Like if you look on your hand or look on your foot, you'll see a lot the venules are like multiple tributaries rather than us having two tributaries, the Ohio and the Mon, the Allegheny and the Mon at the confluence at the point being, it's multiple. It's like you had 6, 10 rivers falling, coming together to make the Ohio. That's what happens a lot, particularly coming from the extremities. There's a lot of blood vessels that come in. So the tunics are thinner, the lumens are larger. Okay, the tunica externa is always thicker. Collagen and elastic fibers, so they'll stretch. That's why we call them capacitance vessels. And effectively, at any one time, 2/3 of your blood are in veins. So people are so artery oriented. And I understand. I mean, if your coronary arteries are damaged, you're having a heart attack, either that has happened or looking to happen. You have to do something about it. I understand that, but the reality is that a lot of times when if we don't have enough venous supply, blood can't get out of the area and it sludges or stays. The phenomenon is called stasis. It's bad. When blood can't return to the heart effectively, it doesn't allow. Ultimately it's a plumbing problem. You'll hear me say this a lot. If blood can't get out of there, it stays and it sludges in the area. You can't get good oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, nutrient and waste product exchange. That is a proverbial accident looking to happen. Something that you have to avoid. You always see this illustration, again, the elastic artery, the vein that has minimal elastic in it, but inherently it's going to be much more likely to not have to hold its shape, but to be able to expand as necessary. And here's that illustration. So it surprises people. In the arteries, 15% of the blood. In your heart, in the capillaries, not even quite another 15% of the blood. In the lungs, okay, 12%. In the veins and the venules, a lot. 65%. So we need to be more cognizant of that. The pressure is lower. Your blood pressure, and you'll see charts about this, begins to diminish the farther it gets away from the heart. And the more, how should I say it, the more the branching occurs. But remember, it's a continuous system. You have arteries, then a number of elastic arteries, limited the conducting, the muscular or distributing arteries, more arterioles, vastly number more, etc. Okay, and so it's interesting. So it has it doesn't offer a lot of resistance. And in areas, principally the extremities, you have those cup-like structures we call valves. Valves are really important. So in many areas, you have sinuses where the veins have flat. It collects. In some areas, it's just for collection because multiple feeders. You'll see sinuses in the skull when we'll begin to look at the venous flow. That's in there. The other area where we see a lot of sinuses, we see them in the liver, but the area that causes the most problems is in the back of your calf. The muscles in the calf, and I do owe you a muscles presentation, okay, is very critical. You have two giant muscles there, the gastrocnemius and soleus. When you hear about someone getting blood clots, mostly they come from here. Abdominal area second, what we call the soleal sinusoids. So I said, you're stuck. I'm sorry to bother you, but this is an area I researched and wrote papers on and did presentations on. I know, when you have somebody like, you're stuck with it. It's an area of interest. Because my dad's veins. And what happens is it's easy for blood to sludge. Do you ever see somebody, if you worked in the hospital and see somebody has to be in bed for a long period of time, what do they put around their legs? Pardon me? Compression socks and
Sleeves.
what?
Sleeves.
Sleeve. And what do the sleeves do? Squeezers. You have do you ever see these things? You can buy them at home. Okay, it's easy. You can find them on Amazon easily enough. But in the hospital, because the person can't get out of bed, they wear what they call TED hose, thromboembolic disease hose, and then they have alternate sequential compression devices. It's been around forever. When I was in bed after both of my abdominal surgeries, we're getting to that. After both of my abdominal surgeries. Remember when I didn't follow my dad's advice? That's part of what happened. But what happens, I'm in bed. I can't get out of bed for a week. Okay. And so I'm getting those squeezers, as I call them, these intermittent compression devices. They do sequentially. So they squeeze for 20 seconds, they relax for 40 seconds. You probably have them on maybe 15, 20 minutes several times a day, that kind of stuff. You can adjust the pressure. Like I say, you can buy them, have them at home if you like. A lot of people do. Yes.
What do the varicose veins have to do? Like, isn't that in your calves? You don't have to use compression.
Pardon me?
The varicose vein,
Go ahead.
what does that have to do, like, with your calves?
Not as much as you think.
Okay.
Not as much as you think. They'll be aggravated if you have that. Okay, but it's a different blood system. Very good. I'm getting that. So sinuses, flattened veins, thin walls, only endothelium, sinus in the back of the heart we talked about, sinuses in the brain. This is the illustration we saw before, but let me add, those are the illustrations we saw before. Incompetent valves are a big part of it. There are two vein systems. Close your eyes and turn the light on. Hear the dulcet tones of Dr. Dress. You have two kinds of circulations. You have a circulation to your skin that occupies about 5 to 10% of your blood. The other, roughly 90%, is muscles and organs and deeper structures. If you look at, it doesn't matter whether it's upper or lower extremity, it kind of looks like this. If I do a mock-up of an extremity like that, I did a presentation on this at a surgical center. Pardon me, I stretch and pat myself on the back. Trust me. I didn't present an hour presentation on artificial intelligence to the Joint Chiefs. Secretary of the Navy, my kid did that. So here are the vessels. You have the deeper vessels, and I'll just draw, generic looking valves. And you have the vessels under the skin. When you see varicose veins, it's the one under the skin that are visible. But you see somebody post-pregnancy, they're common. People who are very heavy, it's common. There's a lot of reasons. And again, it's why I was associated with my dad. And they have valves as well. These are vital, these are not. And so, but there's a connection between them. This is called the superficial system toward the surface. This is the deep system. When you hear about someone getting a blood clot that could break off a phenomenon called embolization to your lungs, it's called a DVT, deep venous thrombosis. The implications for that system, why we don't work, and now when we're in very, very bad health, we're in a pair of socks that was cutting in my calf, I got a superficial, it's called venous phlebitis, irritation. And probably there was a clot. Why was I not worrying about it? Okay, because effectively it's never going to. There's no way it's going to get into the deep circulation and carry to my heart or to my brain or to my lung, wherever it's coming. Just anatomically can't happen. The systems are connected. And again, there's always valves, a series of one-way valves. So you point in the other direction. God, my heart works. Or perforated. When people get varicose veins, typically they have hereditary valvular disorders. A lot of times, that's here in the superficial veins. Sometimes it's in the perforators. It's rarely in the deep veins. When they have a DVT, or they've had a significant blockage, or maybe after they're too heavy, or there's whatever the events are, maybe some trauma that occurred in that extremity. Effectively, the system doesn't work as efficiently, and it will extravagate. The blood will go backwards. There's just be so much pressure, the valves won't be effective, and typically it manifests itself as varicose veins. There's a lot of reasons behind varicose. It's all about pressure and flow. There's a thing called esophageal varices. If someone has really bad gastroesophageal reflux, over time, it really restricts and endangers the blood flow and also irritating the lining of the esophagus. If that starts to bleed, there are big trouble. That's not a good point. Does that answer your question? A little bit. So it comes from the veins, but not, and that's the difference between the deep and superficial veins. I did a whole presentation on this. I worked with a doctor who was he was a surgical instructor. So he was on the faculty at Albert Einstein Medical School in Bronx, New York. And his whole private practice was doing veins. He was doing what's called injection sclerotherapy. You see these cosmetic places on that advertise. Effectively, they're doing the same thing. The method's been around since before the 1900s, before the turn of the 1900s to 2000. No, before the 18, it was around the 1800s, before the 1900s. And they would inject veins, sclerosing agent, kind of to destroy them, and then selectively remove certain veins if necessary surgery. And mostly it was cosmetic. And I did a couple of days with this doctor, I'm sure he's passed away by now, up just outside, he was in, depends how familiar you are with the area, but just outside of New York City. And I went up to tag with him. I forget where it was, over the Tappan Zee Bridge. Very scenic bridge. And I said, well, could I learn this stuff and incorporate it in my practice? He said, I will only do this. I'll only teach somebody if this is all they do. And so he taught a lot of people, and they basically turned it into a money-making cosmetic industry. A lot of it you see in these, they've tried lasers and all these different types of things to do. Because basically they're trying to market their services to be fair, mostly women who don't like the looks of those things and want to have something magical happen. And if they don't know what they're doing, they can create a major league mess. So dilated and painful veins due to incompetent or leaky valves, typically either in the perforators or in the superficial system. Now, when we get to the anatomy, I'll go over that a little bit in lab. Well, naming the vessels, you'll see that I'll point out which is deep and which is superficial. We don't need the superficials. They don't do as much coronary bypass grafting as they used to do. That's right. Look, it's hard for me to even talk about. My dad didn't survive that surgery. And so basically, if you haven't seen somebody who's had this, he was having a triple bypass. I mean, he was a clusterfuck, unfortunately. Because by the time things got going, he deteriorated very, very quickly. I'm more rational about it now. But you remove what's called the saphenous or greater saphenous vein, which runs kind of from your groin all the way down to just anterior to the medial malleolus. And you turn it around and you take out the valves, and it's just about the right size to graft and take the place of a coronary artery. That's the material you use. He has such vein disease that unfortunately he couldn't use it. The surgeon said to me, it's kind of like Swiss cheese. And here's what I told him. He said, and then they tried to use the veins, and he had very long arms, big veins. And they tried to use those, and it didn't work. He had 3 surgeries inside 24 hours. Just, good Lord wasn't with us on that particular day. And I went to the surgeon. I said, I will sign any release you want. Get it in the hospital's attorney. I will sign whatever release you want. Leave me with one. You can take my other one. I don't have any problem with it at that time. That was 1988. And he goes, I can't do it. He says, every time we have tried grafting them, then, I don't know about now nearly 40 years later, it didn't work. So I can't in good conscience do this surgery. No one would allow me to do surgery. So even if you signed your life away, you could still, there would still be malpractice. And I would have signed any waiver in the world that I wouldn't have done anything to try to make my dad survive a few days longer. But that's the way it is. Very, very difficult. So, I mean, with certain dates stick in your mind. That was a very difficult 24-hour period, and I'm sure everybody has those, unfortunately, in their lives. So things that contribute to it, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know hereditarily if that was the big thing. A lot of standing. It was very fit. Uh, Again, it's a larger number than one might think. And I don't know really what did it, but I suspect it was more of a hereditary bent than anything else. In the military, he wasn't injured in wartime. He was stateside. So I mean, because he was that generation. My dad was born in 1914. So I mean, my uncle, my mom's younger brother. I mean, he was injured in the Battle of the Bulge and shot there. I mean, everybody's in the war. That type of thing. Elevated pressure, standing to deliver a baby or having a bowel movement raises it. And I mean, in the bowel movement, then famously, this is where hemorrhoids. Those are veins that you impart a lot of pressure, particularly if you're straining and if they're irritated. We see a lot of people, some people are much more prone to them than others. If they have bowel problems and they have to go a lot. Also, if for gay men, we see it because anal sex will impact that area. And I'm sure women, if that's something they prefer, that's the kind of physical interaction, sexual interaction they prefer, because the veins are weaker. Okay, and then we see a lot of anastomoses. Remember, I used that term, another mouth. We see them a lot, particularly common around joints, abdominal organs, the brain, and the heart. You see some of these areas, the kidney's blood supply is very specific. The spleen will actually look at the blood supply a little bit here, very, very specific in anatomy. That's coming up. Uh, the retina really is, again, you saw it was very specific. Here, a lot of these other areas have ways for multiple passageways. They're very unpendant. They have detours that actually make sense. Just saying. Yeah. You see, and veins have so many of these connections. Veins don't get blocked too much. Arteries a little bit more, and that's everything. We'll stop here. I'll start doing that. No more than an hour, I promise. 45 minutes if you're nice. I'm talked out. I'm celebrating the fact that the Steelers actually won some.